Thank you, Rich. As Rich mentioned, I'm already here 3.5 years. Oh my gosh, I never thought that it's gonna take so long. I came here with the belief it's gonna be maybe a few months, and I'm still here, unfortunately. So, as you know, I was a professor in Ukrainian university, and here I'm extension assistant professor at the Department of Agricultural Economics, and I do research on global food security and in particular on impact of Russian war in Ukraine on global food security, grain markets, etc. So thank you again for continuous interest to the topic. As I said, unfortunately, the war is still in place and there are still a lot of uncertainty. And today I will provide some latest updates regarding grain and oilseed production. I will explain what are the changes in trade between Ukraine and the European Union and how it impacts grain and oilseed export from Ukraine. We also will look on world grain prices, and at the end, I also have some update on Russian production and export. And as usually, I have way more information that we might have time. But my slides are pretty friendly, so you can learn more details from them if you are interested afterward. So before we talk about grain and oilseed, I would like to remind you that Russia invaded Ukraine for several geopolitical reasons. Ukraine has a favorable geographical location with access to Black Sea and number of ports, which Russia seeks to fully control, of course. Russia also wants to control all of Ukraine's gas, oil, and ammonia pipelines, as Russian gas is transported to Europe and the rest of the world through Ukrainian territory and Black Sea ports. But another reason that we didn't talk yet about is natural resources. As you might heard, the United States and Ukraine signed recently an agreement on the joint investment and development of Ukraine's mineral resources, particular rare earths and critical minerals. That is why actually I included this map in case you haven't seen this. Ukraine has around 20,000 known deposits of 117 minerals, including over 20 critical minerals and rare earth metals, valued up to $11.5 trillion. So, of course, Russia wants to have those resources. And returning to agriculture, of course, Russia is interested in rich Ukrainian soil. Just a reminder that Ukraine owns a third of the most fertile black soil in the world, which allows Ukraine to produce food several times more than it's needed for domestic consumption. So this map that I have on the slide is the latest NASA harvest map of cropland in Ukraine in 2025. And as you can see on this part, Russia is pretty intensively uses occupied territories, especially Kherson, the Zaporizhia region, and even Crimea in order to increase their harvest and increase their geopolitical influence on global food market. So using those satellite data, NASA Harvest released 2025 winter crop production estimates for Ukraine. And these estimates show that Ukraine's government-controlled areas were expected to produce around 21 million metric tons of winter wheat and around 4 million metric tons of rapeseed, while Russia's occupied territories were expected to produce at least 5 million tons of wheat and around 120,000 tons of rapeseed. And this is only two crops, but there are also other crops that are commonly produced in that area, like barley, sunflower, fruits, veggies. I read recently from open Russian sources that at least 1.8 million tons of grain and 660,000 tons of oil crops were harvested so far from the Zaporizhia region. At least 874,000 tons of grain were harvested from Lugansk region, 360,000 tons from Donetsk, and so on, meaning that those estimates of NATO harvest are pretty close to the reality. And of course, Russia will use this grain and oilseeds to increase their export. However, stable Ukraine agricultural production and export is still really matter for domestic and global food security. And despite wartime risks, Ukraine's agriculture sector continues to demonstrate resilience and keeps leading positions in the world agricultural production and export. We discussed many times that as a result of territory loss, annual crop acreage declined for over 30%, which led to significant reduction in crop production. But let's see what happened lately as war ongoing. So in 2025, Ukraine has planted almost 7% more of total grain and legumes crops, as some land was returned to cultivation. Approximately 460,000 hectares were returned to cultivation. It's not too much, but still gives opportunity to produce more. As you may remember from my early webinars, corn was the least profitable crop, and many farmers started to switch to oil crops, especially to soybeans, as you can see. This year, it was actually opposite. Less soybeans, less rapeseed, but more sunflower compared to the previous year. However, it's still lower regarding sunflower than before the war, but soybeans and rapeseed are still higher, especially soybeans compared to the pre-war level. So far, around 74% of planted area is harvested, and corn, soybeans, and sunflower are still in progress. So the yield, unfortunately, lowering for many crops as soil is getting exhausted, farmers having limited access to finance, inputs, and machineries, as well as obviously agroecological calendar not always can be followed due to the war. We spoke earlier about 2023, so I will not repeat that. That was exceptionally good weather conditions. So let's take a look on 2025 compared to 2024. So due to not enough moisture in soil during last winter, which was almost without snow, very unusual for Ukraine, the yields are lower, but also this is the impact of lower fertilizer application rate. Of course, no snow good for soldiers, and another winter is coming, and Russia again attacking all power plants in Ukraine badly. And we had again several blackouts, but we're still keeping moving, right? So as for now, we see that average yields are 8% lower than last year, and the biggest actually decline is in oilseeds crops. So as I mentioned, one of the reasons of lower yields is decrease in fertilizer application. I don't have yet numbers for 2025 as it's not completed yet. But if we compare 23, 22, 24, the application of fertilizers at least 35% lower than before the war. And of course, this would impact yields, and that both all types of organic and inorganic fertilizer, all the nitrogen, potash, phosphate, everything is decreasing. So in 2025, what I know that Ukraine imported more fertilizers than last year, but fertilizers are getting more and more expensive. So I'm not sure that farmers would apply more this year as they did last year. So when I have more data, I of course will share with you regarding fertilizer application. Winter sowing campaign is at its finish. Initially, it was expected to have pretty much the same area under winter crops. Lately, Ministry of Economy announced that sown area under winter wheat can be increased to 5.2 million hectares instead of 4.8. Such increase is related to poor corn and sunflower crops that suffered from the drought this year very much, so farmers want to switch. Barley can end up with 550,000 hectares according to what is going on, but at least 200,000 hectares decline gonna be in winter rapeseed. So this is what the expectations, but again, it's not completed yet. So we'll see when we have the final picture. A decrease in yield leads to a decrease in production. The total harvest of grain and oilseeds in Ukraine is expected this year around 73.5 million tons, 5% less than previous year. Including 54.6 million tons of grain, or minus 3% to the previous year, and 18.8 million tons of oilseeds, or 11% less than in previous year. In 2025, Ukrainian government estimate the harvest very low due to moisture deficit. The harvest of corn is expected on 26 million tons, pretty close to the previous year. So far, 10.4 million tons harvested. We finished harvesting wheat, 22.8 million tons of wheat, pretty much the same as last year and as it was estimated for this year. 5.4 million tons of barley. Ukraine harvested 3.3 million tons of rapeseed. That is less than last year and less than expected, but it's still higher than before the war. We also expect to harvest 5.4 million tons of soybeans. Initially, it was 5.8. We harvested so far 3.9, lower than expected, but higher than before the war. The expectation for sunflower also were lowered from 11.5 to 10.1 million tons due to unfavorable weather conditions. So far, we harvested 8.4 million tons. A decrease in production leads to a decrease in export estimate. In 25-26 marketing year, experts expect 21 million tons of corn export. In the previous season, Ukraine had, as you can see, pretty high corn export level due to very large ending stocks from the beginning of the war and previous very high yields of 2021. So I don't know if you know, Ukraine consumes only around 4.5 million tons of corn annually, so the rest is intended for export. Wheat export is expected to be between 15 and 16 million tons, barley 2.2 million tons, soybeans 3.7 million tons, rapes is 2.7 million tons, and only 100,000 tons of sunflower seeds, as it is mainly processed into sunflower oil and then exported. So in 2024, Ukraine was still the first on sunflower oil and sunflower meal export. Ukraine kept third place for rapeseed export, fourth for corn, fifth for barley, and sixth for wheat and soybean. In 25-26 marketing year, as you can see, Ukraine is still expected to be sixth. On the wheat market, also its share will be lower. Unfortunately, due to the US government shutdown, October USDA report was not released. and I don't know when we can see November report. So this is data from September report. And our attention is always to Russian share on the wheat market. If before the big war, it was around 16%, right? And Russian average was around 35 million tons. In 25-26, the share is expected at 21%, and it is expected wheat export from Russia around 45 million tons. Corn is one of the main commodities that exported from Ukraine. Although Ukrainian share on the corn market decreased, it's still pretty high. In 25-26, it is expected to be over 12%. And, you know, since Ukraine exports so much and it's forced on the corn market, there is still no such capacity to replace the loss of Ukrainian corn production. However, we can see how US farmers are doing great, increasing their corn production during the last several years. Unfortunately, this reflects in the lower prices for American farmers. Russia tried to improve their corn production at the expense of the occupied territories, but domestic consumption in Russia is so high that Russia still cannot make huge impact on the corn market. So at the same time, Ukrainian agricultural export is getting lower for all commodities. If in 23-24, the export of grain and legumes was around 51 million tons, in 24-25, it declined to 40.6 million tons, and the largest decline was in corn from over 29.5 to around 22 million tons in 24-25. In this marketing year, 25-26, the decline in commodity export from Ukraine is escalating. During July-October of 24-25, it was exported around 4.5 million tons of corn. In the same period of this marketing year, it was only 1.7 million tons, which is 61, almost 62% less. There are several reasons for that. First, agricultural production decreased for many crops. Second, EU imposed quotas, limited agricultural import from Ukraine, and it immediately affected Ukraine export, which we can see right. Oops, what is going on? Which we can see right here. I did a webinar earlier with a lot of details about this issue, and I'm gonna talk a little bit more what have changed since the agreement was over in July. But you can see that immediately the corn export was so low in July, and the lowest in September 2025, lower than when ports were blocked. So that is very, very unusual for Ukraine. And again, as you can see, wheat export exceeded corn export. It was never happened before the war. Always corn export was higher than wheat export, but you see for several years there is a period when the ending stocks of corn is so low that wheat export exceeds corn export. Extremely important in terms of global food security and domestic security is uninterrupted export logistics from Ukraine. And as you know, before the war, 90% of Ukrainian agricultural export was going through Black Sea ports. And currently only 3 big Odessa ports are operating, and Ukrainian government, of course, puts a lot of efforts to protect them and ensure safety of both of vessels and people. However, as you can see, that there is some decline in exports through Black Sea ports, and this not only the reason of security, but also lower production, but also railway and track transportation that brings grain to the ports, right? You know that Russia does a lot of missile strikes, right, on different transport infrastructure, and it leads to such situation. The new river ports, exports through the new river port declined to less than 100,000 tons because it's more expensive logistics to get there compared with big Odessa port. And as you can see in July, the export from Odessa port was just 1.9 million tons of grain and oil. It's very, very low compared to even the previous periods, or compare, of course, to pre-war level. In October, it was 3.5, a little bit higher as new harvest arrived. So we had better exports through Black Sea ports. We also can observe significant decline in the export via railway and truck. And of course, that is due to European quotas, because all those ways are going to European border. But also we have some shortage of drivers. So that's why we cannot supply so much via trucks anymore. So all men are used in military, unfortunately. At the beginning of the war, when all Ukrainian ports were blocked by Russia, Ukraine started, to search for alternative routes through land borders and through mentioned small Danube River ports to Europe. And we discussed this diagram earlier. I just added 25, 26 marketing years that you would see what is going on right now and how it changed. As you remember, at the beginning of the war, we redirected our export mainly to Europe and China, as that was our major buyer before the war. Started to buy very low of grain because they switched to Brazil. They started to buy more from Russia. So instead, Spain and Turkey became a leader. What is going on now? As you can see, Egypt, Indonesia, Turkey, Algeria, our top importers right now. And as you might remember from my previous webinars, Egypt, Indonesia, Algeria, from the beginning of the war started to buy more from Russia, but now they are again buying more from Ukraine. Spain didn't buy much so far, and China is kind of at the same level as compared to the previous year, July, October. Talking about oilseed market, now Germany is a leader. China is on the second place, but the amount China buys from Ukraine is significantly lower compared to what they would do before the war. Talking about India, India was one of the major buyer of oil and other oil crops from Ukraine, and they declined again due to purchase more from Russia, and now it's very, very low. So that was our major market. So meaning that we need again to redirect our export to find new markets and see what's gonna happen, especially with all those changes that happen in trade with Europe. Here in next several slides, I have more detailed information about what's going on with grain and oilseed export in Ukraine. And I'm gonna run through those slides very quickly. You can learn them later if you wish. So as you can see, grain export in 24-25 was lower than in 23-24, and now it's even more lower in 25, 26. The same trend is for wheat. Our main importer now is Egypt, almost tripled so far, purchased from Ukraine, Indonesia, Algeria, Vietnam, and Spain. But as you see, how much less Spain is buying currently from Ukraine. Wheat flour is not so much produced. I mean, it's produced in Ukraine, but not so much exported, mainly for domestic consumption. And if we compare this marketing year to the previous marketing year, we can see that production of wheat flour in this period was -7% and -16% of wheat export from Ukraine. So it's getting lower. The major buyers so far of wheat flour from Ukraine, that is Moldova, Czech Republic, Palestine, Spain, and Poland. Barley export is declining as production of barley declined. Our traditional buyer of barley is still China, as there is no other big producers and exporters of barley besides Ukraine. So there is no much replacement they can find. Then Turkey, Libya, Saudi Arabia, Lebanon. That is on barley export, what is going on. On corn markets, again, it is significant decline. And in October, it was less than million tons of corn were exported, and main destinations were Turkey, Italy, Spain, New Zealand, Egypt. So that is major destinations. Sunflower industry, talking about sunflower, of course, we are trying to process as much as we can, because we would sell more high value products to the global market, right, and get more revenue. However, it's getting again much more complicated with all power system damages and constant strikes on electricity power plants. So if we would not have electricity, we will not be able to process sunflower seeds, right? So in 2024-25 marketing year, Ukraine processed 19% less than in previous marketing year, and production of sunflower oil declined by 21%. As a result, the export declined by 24%. So sunflower seeds are pretty low. Here it was a little bit higher because we were not able to process. Now it's less than 1,000 tons of export in October. And the majority of our destinations for sunflower oil, that is Europe, France, Spain, Czech Republic, Finland, but also United Arab Emirates. That is our destination. But here you can see how much lower in September, right? Already processing in Ukraine. Export of sunflower oil, 167 so far in September. Major destinations last year was Europe, although it was less than usually India, Turkey, Iraq, Egypt, Lebanon, Saudi Arabia. So talking about India, actually, Ukraine is always was a major supplier of sunflower oil to India, but also Russia. And I included this slide because I wanted to show you that Russian oil remains the leader with 58% market share on Indian market. And you can see how much it's higher. And less and less Ukraine, but more and more Russia. But also some Argentinian sunflower oil, it started to come to Indian market. So now Ukraine needs to compete not only with Russia, but also with Argentina. And as you can see, in September, there was no Ukrainian sunflower oil shipped to India, just Russia, Argentina, and some other countries. The side product from sunflower oil production is sunflower meal, and Ukraine produced 4.5 million tons on sunflower meal in 24-25, and that is 22% less. And as a result, the export was also less, 27%. The major destination for sunflower meal is European Union, but also China, Egypt, Morocco, Turkey, United Kingdom. So Ukraine remains the major supplier of sunflower meal to China with 63%, which goes which comes to China from other countries. So Ukraine has 63%. Russia is not able to replace. There is also some import of sunflower meal to China from Kazakhstan and Bulgaria. Sunflower oil, as I mentioned, the major destination is Europe, and actually 95% almost of oil that comes to Europe that comes from Ukraine. However, this is what happened since new quotas introduced, right? And all the complications with Ukrainian exports. The same with sunflower meal. Ukraine is not a leader on sunflower meal import in the EU, it's Argentina, but look how much lower and lower and lower, and August and September is significantly lower. So unlike all other commodities, Ukraine increased production of soybean in 24-25 season, and as a result, a processing and export of soybeans increased. That is one of the most profitable crops right now in Ukraine. So it's plus 42% last marketing year compared to the previous. As a result, the export of soybeans increased to 28%. Geography of soybean export is the following: European Union, the majority, almost 43% goes to European Union, 25% to Turkey, then Egypt, Pakistan, Lebanon, Serbia. So at the same time, 25-26 season, soybean from Ukraine is pretty low. As you can see, just 77,000 tons. Soybean oil also production increased almost twice, and this significantly also increased soybean meal export from Ukraine. And you can see how much higher 24-25 were compared to 23-24. Regarding sunflower oil export from Ukraine for September-August marketing year, that was mainly Europe, but also you can see mainly Poland actually among European countries. So, but also India, and there is Saudi Arabia, but the rest that would be European countries. Soybean meal exports also goes mainly to Europe, Poland, Hungary, Romania, Spain, Turkey, and here is also Lebanon, which is not Europe, right? Talking about our major destinations of soybeans and soybean meal, which is Europe mainly, again, we can see a decline since introduction of new quotas, and August, September is very low, and here August, September is very low, meaning that this impact, those quotas impact definitely European trade with European Union. On the rapeseed market, there is decline in rapeseed production and rapeseed export by 53%. You can see how much lower this year already compared to the previous year. And the major destinations for the rapeseed, that is Germany, Belgium, New Zealand, so mainly it goes to Europe. Ukraine is among major suppliers of rapeseeds to European Union. It's around 33% were last year, but Australia has higher share, and also Canada has pretty high share. Processing of rapeseed decreased just a little in this period, July-September of 25-26 compared to 24-25. But we can see that if we look at the previous year, it's significantly lower than in other years. Export of rapeseed oil increased for 19%, but export of rapeseed meal decreased. In this particular season, 25-26, July-September compared to 24-25. So, however, you can see this green line, that is rapeseed oil export from Ukraine, much lower than previous year. Our major destinations is mainly Europe, New Zealand, Poland, but also you can see Singapore here and a little China. It was at the beginning of the season, but nothing for several last months. So what is going on with all those quotas in trade between Ukraine and European Union? As you know, Ukraine is a candidate for the EU membership, and I had my last webinar was about all the economic relations between Ukraine and European Union. So if you are interested, you can watch it if you haven't. But just a few words. So the association agreement between the EU and Ukraine includes a deep and comprehensive free trade area, which has provisionally applied since 2016. So this aims to boost trade and services between trade of goods and services between the EU and the US by gradually cutting some tariffs and bringing Ukraine's rule in line with all the EU standards. But when the war started, and here in this table, actually, you have those quotas that were imposed with this agreement. So it doesn't mean that Ukraine didn't have any quotas for trade with Ukraine. It did. But when the war started with full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, the EU has granted Ukraine full trade liberalization. Suspending import duties, quotas, and trade defense measures for imports from Ukraine, and that was temporary. That was known as autonomous trade measures regulation. So, but those measures were terminated on June 5th, 2025. And we returned to so-called visa-free trade regime, which is not really free, and it has some limitations. So since it was in the middle of the year, that was the amount that we were allowed kind of to export by the end of the year, as some products were already exported according to those quotas. So this is what we were expected, very low, like 500,000 tons of wheat, or just like 400,000 tons of maize, right? After several rounds of negotiations between Ukrainian government and European Commission, an updated trade agreement entered into force on October 29th, just a week ago. So tariff quotas for a number of agricultural and food products were increased. If I'm not mistaken, it is around 26 titles, mainly those that EU has lower self-sufficiency rate. So in this table, I selected only grain products, and as you can see, quotas for corn increased for 350,000 tons, for wheat 300,000, for barley 100,000, and so on. Besides, new categories of quotas emerge. In particular, here, new quota for wheat, barley, and corn flour, for which export of which were previously taken into account in those three categories. So now it's separated category that allows us to export more and have more room for export of grain. So would be this beneficial for Ukraine? Of course, but not so much as you think, probably. So if we compare in monetary term those quotas that we had earlier and now, of course, Ukraine will benefit, right? Because we will sell more, we will get better revenue. So this study actually was conducted for European Commission by Berlin Economic Team to show what is the benefits and what are the losses for Ukraine. And using hypothetical prices of 2024, they calculated that value of Ukraine export within old and new quotas will change, and the potential expansion of duty-free exports would amount around $630 million per year, at 35% increase at the aggregated level, like all those list of all those commodities. For selected crops, which I selected for grain, such expansion amounted to 278 million tons, or almost plus 36%. And Ukraine can save around $52.8 million on duties. So that is positive, right? It's benefit. But this positive benefit is only if we compare those new quotas to those quotas that were before the war. If we compare new quotas to Ukraine's export during the wartime within autonomous trade measure regulation, then Ukrainian export was liberated from any duties and quotas. Of course, the effect will be negative. So to illustrate this, they took 2024 year export and compared to the potential export that could happen next year. So the assumption actually was made that if the new tariff quotas is above the actual export, no import duties apply, and those the estimated export to the EU are equal to the actual export. So no effect, like here, right? It was no effect. If new tariff quota is below the actual export, the EU import duty applies for export over tariff export quotas, and they proceed with the estimate of the effect. So it can be very confusing with corn because it doesn't follow the rule, but the point is that there is zero import duty on supply of corn from third countries, including Ukraine. So that's why it's actually here zero. So meaning that nothing will change actually for corn. So we can still export more corn to Europe if we wish. So as a result of those calculations, it was estimated that the reduction of Ukrainian export to the EU will amount to $1,144 million. including $924 million from grain product, or minus 23%. So as you saw on previous slides, that was some increase, but compared to what was last year, it's definitely some losses, right? So taking a more close look of those two commodities, which are affected the most, wheat and barley, we can see that also for both of them, quotas increases. It is much lower than in 2024, especially for wheat, over 5 million tons. So it means that Ukraine, at the end of the day, will still kind of losing their revenue from the redirecting export to other countries, or finding new opportunities what to do with that wheat. So actually, this estimation were done for, so that was assumed that wheat, barley, and sugar export will stop after the new trade quotas will be reached. So meaning that Ukraine would need to redirect at least $690 million of export, right? And at the end of the day, Ukraine from to those crops will be in minus $2 and $6 million from lower export. So this is kind of like the idea what is going on with trade. So if Europe will keep those quotas and will keep those policy, of course, it will affect Ukrainian export to Europe and other countries. But also the point is that Ukraine will accumulate higher ending stocks. And we already can see this, especially for wheat. And it can affect also prices, right? And create some tense on the wheat market with other countries.
Antonina, I'm going to just take a pause here. There was a question from Dan. You can read it.
Okay. Problem that doesn't have any plan. So the question is, why Ukrainian farmers apply less fertilizers, and the question is it because less production and due to damage of logistics, the supply is lower, or there is limited access to credits for purchasing this crop inputs like seeds and fertilizers, herbicides, etc. So it is everything together. So there is no one answer, because in each situation it can be different, but in majority that is everything together. Farmers that didn't have enough profit, they are not able to buy very expensive fertilizers and new seeds. That's why they would use those seeds that they saved from previous harvest. Also, there is interruption with logistics. It's not only out from Ukraine, right, when you export, but you need to import. And we had some issues where we couldn't get fertilizers through Black Sea ports, and vessels were blocked. And yes, it would cause also additional increase in prices, right, for fertilizers. And even within Ukraine, in a safe, relatively, let's say, safe regions, it's easier to deliver inputs, right, because of the logistics. But farmers that are in Kharkiv region, farmers that are in Dnipro region, which are close to front lines, they still produce, and you know, it's hard to deliver there because nobody wants to drive there. The railway can be damaged, etc., etc. So that is just a complex problem all over. Any more
Folks,
questions?
if you have anything else, you could go ahead and put that in the chat. Be glad to have it. And I think we'll move on. But if something comes in, I'll let you know. Thanks.
Okay. So in the next several slides, I have latest balances of supply and demand of grain and oilseeds in Ukraine. So as usual, I'm leaving this on my slides. You can learn this as much as you can. I just would like to make a few comments on a few things that in 2024-25, you can see that gross harvest was lower, and this immediately reflected in lower export. However, you see it, we just discussed these issues, right? So ending stock is higher, and it can be the same next year. So we expect a little bit higher gross harvest, which can lead to a higher export, but ending stocks will still higher. Here is just an illustration of ending stocks in Ukraine for grain in total and wheat and corn. So totally it's, of course, lower than before the war in the same period, but it's getting higher compared to the latest time, especially for wheat, but not for corn. Corn is very, very low ending stocks. On supply demand of oil seeds, it was lower production last marketing year, and it is expected much lower production this marketing year. And ministry is announcing even less, like around 18 and 18 and a half, 19 million tons. So we'll see it's still ongoing. With this, export gonna be significantly lower. Ending stocks gonna be less, but we hope that we can process, right? And processing will still at least on the same level as last year. So here is ending stocks for agricultural products, oilseed crops in Ukraine. And you can see how higher now sunflower seeds, ending stocks significantly higher than before the war. Also the same with rapeseeds and soybeans. If we compare October 2021, now it's significantly higher because production is higher, but also export is kind of limited a little bit. Well, a few words about prices. Talking about prices, since the beginning of new season, the range of prices for wheat is very wide, and Ukrainian wheat is the most expensive still for last few months. It was traded to $33 per ton, followed by Russia to 30, and American wheat was traded 2022, but the difference much smaller now compared to what was going on in August. So one of the reasons why the prices last week kind of increased. So Russia actually introduced some increase in duty, wheat export duty for wheat export from Russia. That was for period from October 29 to November 6. And actually this inclusive increase was 70%. That was Russian ministry mentioned. So to me, that was one of the reasons why it kind of boosted some prices. On a corn market, prices for Ukrainian corn had grown till August here, right, and then dropped. Now it's around 220 per ton. American corn is 204, Argentinian 206. Situation on the barley market is a little bit different. Australian is the most expensive, 232, then Ukraine 230, Russians 227, and France 221. But the range is not so wide. There is very close to what everyone has, right? Not like on wheat or corn market. So on sunflower oil, traditionally European sunflower oil is the most expensive. Then it is Ukrainian $1,270 per ton. On soybean markets, Brazil is still leader since April, right here. They started to grow and it continued to grow. So that is what we have on prices. So then I have a lot of slides about Russia, and I have balances. I don't really have much time for that, and I knew that I would not have time, but I wanted you to know what is going on. Yeah, is there a question, Rich?
No, Dan, I think you're still unmuted. I'm going to mute you.
Oh, okay. So I have this dynamic of stocks here, and the same for supply and demand of oilseed. So talking about the projection for Russian production and export, it was just crazy what they announced lately, 2 days ago, that they harvested 137 million tons already. Actually, the expectations was around 129. Then Putin says that they want to have 135. Of course, they would make 135 if even they couldn't, right? But lately they announced 137, including 93.5 million tons of wheat. So far, they harvested 2.4 million tons of corn, but they expect up to 14 million tons of corn. So, according to the weather condition and what they have, it's hard to believe that they harvested so much without including those occupied territories that we discussed at the beginning of the webinar, right? So if they include to those 129 additional 5 million of wheat and another million of barley and so on, so that will make those 137, and I could believe in that. So that is technically what I wanted to say. I will, one more remark. You know that Russia always plays on grain market and always try to impose some tariffs and quotas and on export. So, and there is some kind of correlation between Russian grain export quotas and the amount they export. And remember, I mentioned earlier in my earlier webinars that on February 15th, they imposed those quotas like 10.6 million tons to the end of the year. And this immediately declined, right? Reflected in the decline of the export. So if now they again will introduce those quotas and high export duties, it will again affect the market. So totally for 25-26, they expect to export around 52.7 million tons of grain, including 42 million tons of wheat, plus 6% barley. Initially, it was 3.5. Now they say 4.5. Okay, and corn also increased 3.3. So we'll see how it goes. But I also had a question, and I will show you this map just quickly. The question was how Russian export affected, right, from their region. So Russia has a lot of Black Sea ports here, right? And there is also another port on Caspian Sea, which connects them with Kazakhstan and the Asian Wall. And there is not on the map, but there is also another port in on Baltic. So all those ports are in use, and there is no sanctions, no limitations on export of fertilizers or any agricultural products from Russia. So technically they go here, right, and export whatever they need. However, all those ports, right, they're like, and they also use those ports, which is Ukrainian, right? So it means that their export much higher now using Black Sea ports compared to the pre-war. And on the next few slides, I have these statistics, how much the shipment of grain from ports increased during last years. And what is really interesting for me on oilseed market, oilseed export from Russia, that they started to use those offshore zones of Black Sea. So technically, that the capacity very limited probably in ports, so they needed to load and reload somewhere in free waters, or that is Ukrainian ports that they just don't want to show as Ukrainian ports. So that is what is going on with Russian export of agricultural products. I have a few more slides, which I leave for your review, and I will stop as time is over. And if you have more questions, please ask.
We have one question in the chat, and folks, I've also opened it up so you can unmute and talk to Antonina now if you'd prefer that rather than putting it in the chat. The question there, what would be the impact on global price and stocks if Ukraine has more wheat in its own ending stocks?
So it depends how much Ukraine would export at the same time. If our ending stocks would be very, very high, right, and we would not be able to export, this will increase the price, like on world market. So depending how much we will be able to export. So our expectation that we will export less, and we would have higher ending stocks, meaning that price can increase.
Which probably means that domestically the price would decline in Ukraine,
Yes.
making it more
Yes.
difficult for farmers to obtain those inputs and stuff like that.
That's true. If we are talking about domestic price, it definitely gonna decline. At this situation, you know, consumers will win because then flour will be cheaper, bread will be cheaper, right? And you know, we suffer from terrible food inflation right now. Like everything is twice, 3 times more expensive than before the war. However, this will limit it. There is always two sides of the medal, right? And this will leave that farmers will not have enough income, not will have enough profit to support themselves for next season.
Antonina, this is Dan.
Yes, Dan. Thank you for visiting my webinar.
You betcha. With regard to that question, both Ukraine and Russia are given their financial, the need for them to produce money to help finance, the ongoing military conflict. I would think that if they had the opportunity to sell wheat to generate income, to generate money to help on their internal finances, they probably would, even at the risk of lower prices. So I understand Matt's good question there, but I just wonder about the motivation to would Ukraine be motivated more to build up stockpiles or to generate cash? I think right now they'd be probably motivated to generate cash. Is that the right way to view it?
Right. Yes, then. So we are not motivated to generate ending stocks. That is because we need cash. But it's forced, you know. If we cannot sell, so what do you do? So we need to find new markets, you know, and find new opportunities where we can. And now we are competing always with Russia on this market, especially if they would propose a lower price to, let's hypothetically say, to Indonesia or Egypt, right? Why Egypt would buy from Ukraine if they can buy from Russia cheaper? That is nothing about friendship. That is just business.
Antonina, thank you very much for putting this together and doing it. I sure appreciate it.
Thank you
We'll
so
probably
much.
have something after the first of the year again. I don't have anything scheduled yet, but that will be happening along the way just as things come up and as she has time.
Yeah,
So
and if
thank
there
you
are
very
more
much.
questions, shoot me email and I will reply.